From running a fund to running a country, numerous presidential candidates hail from a business background. Here is how Bill Ackman sees the future of the country.
I think the United States of America is a bit like the kind of companies we target, right? It's a phenomenal business, but it's been undermanaged for a long period of time, and it needs to be managed more effectively. And we need to create the right incentives to grow the pie for the benefit of everyone. And I think we should focus on growth as opposed to growth, eliminating friction, creating the right incentives, and making the United States a place where people want to do business. I mean, it is crazy. You know, the corporate tax policies we have now that basically encourage U.S. companies to sell themselves to foreign companies.
Tax inversions, you mean?
Yeah, well, not even tax inversions. I mean, effectively, what's going on now, because tax inversions are discouraged, is foreign companies are buying U.S. companies. And you know, if a U.S. company is inverting to go offshore, they're still likely to keep their employees in their corporate headquarters and everything else. If they're not allowed to invert, or they're discouraged from inverting, and they're competing in an industry where the foreign pharmaceutical or other businesses are operating with 15% tax rates, you know, the foreign companies are just going to buy U.S. companies, and they're not going to be much less willing to keep, you know, the jobs here. So we've got to fix problems like that. We have to level the global, you know, our competitiveness from a corporate tax point of view. Otherwise, you know, the consequences are very draconian.
Speaking of taxes, on a more personal note, right. Donald Trump, well, actually, I'll start with the president. President Obama has said hedge fund managers are lottery winners. Okay. Donald Trump has said hedge fund managers are getting away with murder. Okay. Hillary Clinton has said hedge fund managers pay fewer taxes than nurses and truck drivers. Bernie Sanders, whole big, what he calls a Robin Hood tax. Sure. Where do you come out on carried interest? Is it fair that hedge fund managers pay less than a nurse?
Actually, interestingly, hedge fund managers, we don't get a lot of benefit from carried interest in terms of the way that we're structured, interestingly. I'm all in favor of fairness in terms of taxes, and I'm also totally happy if the right thing to do is to raise taxes on carried interest. But the whole notion of carried interest affects not just the hedge fund industry. So venture capitalists get, quote unquote, a carried interest benefit. Private equity gets a carried interest benefit. The real estate industry, the oil and gas industry, every industry where someone forms a partnership, someone else puts up capital, and the promoter gets a share of the profits, those interests have been taxed at lower tax rates. If the conclusion is that's not good for America, it's not going to incentivize, it's not the right incentives, then we should solve that problem. But it shouldn't be leveled against, I mean, maybe hedge fund managers are an easy target because it's a relatively small number of people. But I just think it should, in the interest of fairness, if someone's getting a profit interest, then, and it's going to be taxed at a certain rate, it shouldn't be limited to, you know, if they're investing in securities as opposed to oil and gas drilling, as opposed to startups or otherwise.
Well, for those who don't know, we know you have signed the Giving Pledge, you have your own foundation, which is about $350 million. But as you say, hedge fund managers are often targeted. Dan Loeb, for example, East Hampton, they had the Hedge Clippers, that was more about charter schools, and Cuomo. But how do you see this relationship between, let's say, the 1% and the rest of the population?
Look, I think income disparity is a major problem. But I think, you know, one of the great things about the United States, you know, when I was growing up and, you know, someone down the block's dad bought a Corvette, you know, I wasn't jealous. I was motivated to, you know, do well so I could, you know, buy the car that I liked. And I think having a country where people are inspired by successful people is a good thing, where people are upset about allocation of resources. That's why I think things like carried interest, you know, should be addressed in a way that creates more perception of fairness. But I think you want to design a tax policy that motivates people to create wealth and jobs and not want to relocate elsewhere. Right? You know, look at the UK changed tax policy in a way that was very negative for hedge fund managers. You know, 3 went to Switzerland, and the tax base of the UK dropped dramatically. I mean, you know, if you make, I mean, you know, Bloomberg created an environment in New York where I think, you know, almost everyone benefited, and it's been a.
Do you worry about New York as a longtime New Yorker that you see it going downhill since Bloomberg's tenure?
I think you want an environment in which people are. It's okay to be successful, and it's encouraged, and people aren't embarrassed by it. I don't know de Blasio well enough. I think, you know, the rhetoric should be a little bit more pro growth and a little less about reallocation of wealth.
Bill Ackman, billionaire hedge fund manager.